The most recent balance patch for Overwatch has brought into question if 5v5 is really better for the game or if tanks are really that healthy in this state, because there are some alarming changes going into a direction that is probably not the best for the game overall. And before we just abandon 5v5, I want to go ahead and put my hat in the ring and see basically how I would change the tank role as a whole and individually to better make them work in 5v5. Now, I would like to say before I get into my fake patch notes that you're going to be seeing here, just because there is one bad patch or multiple bad patches, and it feels like it takes a while, it does not necessarily mean that 5v5 is unsolvable. I think that's the wrong conclusion to come to. I understand that after like a year plus of the issues not really being fixed properly or just other issues arising, that it feels like the easy answer is to say that it doesn't work and that 6v6 would work. I think the actual conclusion you can come to much more reasonably is that perhaps the work required to make 5v5 work is not exactly realistic, or maybe the dev team are just not really in the right headspace to make 5v5 work. I don't think it is necessarily a problem with 5v5. I think it's just more on the balance. Because I also think that if the direction of the balance is going in the wrong ways, that at least we think, there is no evidence to support that the direction of the balance of 6v6 would be any better. So basically, it's not to say that 6v6 is inherently better or worse. It's really more, I think it is not right to say that just a couple bad patches means that 5v5 is unsolvable. I think it's more just, again, maybe we don't have the resources to solve it, and maybe we don't have the direction to solve it. That's kind of, I want to clear that up before we get into this. But basically, this is a fake patch notes that I have come up with many changes about the tank role. This is specifically about the tank role in 5v5. And basically, these are kind of like, there are some core fundamentals that I wanted to bring in or say like what I think 5v5 tanking should be. So basically, I think that you should be able to feel the effect of your value all the time. This can come from damage, baiting abilities, making space and preventing other people from taking space, having good peel, etc., etc. You just sitting there in the front line taking all the abilities and like getting CC chained and dying, yes, that made, you felt like you made space or you had an impact, but you also died, and it's frustrating, right? Or a lot of times some tanks just kind of sit there and are bullies and they don't really interact very well, like Hog on an angle. Like, what do you do about Hog? Sometimes the Hog can feel like they're not really doing much, and other times the enemy team feel like they're just not able to deal with the Hog at all. And it's just this weird psychological mixture that it doesn't really work. It's kind of like Widow, where you're holding space and you're preventing people from walking into your sight lines, but you're not hitting any shots. So it feels like you're not having an impact, but you still are, right? We want to encourage her to have a feeling like you're having an impact, right? And also, I want to encourage more counterplay that tanks have. I feel like their tanks should be versatile to a point. They should have obvious strengths and weaknesses, but not so strong or weak in any direction that they feel like they're a caricature or there's no way to like actually like counterplay other like comps or characters or anything like that. Hard counters, especially tanks on tank, I feel like just don't work. If you swap characters, it shouldn't be just to hard counter swap the other tank or make their life actually bearable. It should be more of like, I feel like this is better for me and my comp, and it will give us more options about that other tank, right? It's not about like one defined answer about swapping or not swapping. It's about weighing your options about whether swapping is a good choice and who to swap to, right? Because everybody should have, at least in theory, some counterplay to most, if not all, of the things that are going to be coming their way. How strong they are, that varies, right? I don't want it to be that tanks have lost their identity. I still think they need to be able to do like their unique thing. They can just have a little bit more to do, or really more interaction with their counters, basically. Basically, I just don't want to homogenize the roster. And yeah, I think that's it for the philosophy here. So how are we going to do that, right? So basically, I guess also, like, tanks should be a little more aggressive. You should feel both sides should have an active role in interacting. So tanks should feel like they have an active role with of making space and interacting with the enemy. And the enemy team, DPS and supports and all that, should feel like they have an active role about doing something about the tank, right? Orisa fortify for 4 seconds means you can't really interact with Orisa for 4 seconds. I don't like that. I think it should be a lot more like you can interact with the tank at all times, right? So let's go into the general solutions here. Basically, what I have done overall is we'll go into a lot of these updates. So what I've done here is that I want tanks to focus their survivability mainly in armor. I don't really like the idea that a tank would have one, if not multiple, damage mitigation tools that kind of skews how often you can interact with them. If we're going to have some survivability in the kits, I'd rather it be much more dispersed so that every time you interact with them, you're going to have the same kind of interaction. You're going to be outplaying what they're doing and trying to figure out what they're going to do to you, right? We're still going to have Overwatch and how abilities work, but it's not going to come in the form of, if I shoot them, it's going to do 0 damage, or it's just going to get healed back up, or it's not going to do anything. It's going to be more about, like, if I shoot them now, I'll get one thing out of it, but maybe the tank will benefit, right? Basically, my ideas here are that armor is either better. It's better against most things. You'll see here I have the flat damage rate went back to 5 per projectile. But instead of it being a flat damage reduction, it's going to be more of that 30% damage that it used to be. So basically, it's still good against those tank buster abilities, but against higher burst, it is also still effective. So armor is just a better general survival tool, but it still has its uses as anti-tank. And with armor being effective and being more of what I want in tank survivability by themselves, I think health pools across the board for tank can go down. I think having these tanks with these gigantic health pools and they're able to get healed back up and everything, it just feels really frustrating to play against sometimes. It feels like every time you attack them, it doesn't do very much. Having their overall health pool go down and giving them a little bit more armor, especially tanks that don't even have armor right now, we can give basically every tank should have some amount of armor, and then you can change the dials on about how much armor that they actually have. This would allow, I think, much more consistency about how you interact with tanks. It's much easier to follow. You just kind of inherently know that tanks for a little bit will take less damage, and you can plan around that, right? You don't have to wait for these cooldowns that will just basically make shooting them nonsense. Basically that kind of thing. Now, with lower health pools in general, there is the risk that tanks will blow up. So a lot of what I've put into these changes that I'm going to run through individually is to disincentivize you shooting the tank or focusing on the tank, because it may end up giving them a reward. So basically, instead of having their sustain and survivability through just raw damage reduction, healing, overhealth, which there's going to be some overhealth in there as well, it's really going to be more about like the Zarya principle, where it's like, should I shoot the Zarya while she's charging me because I need to kill her faster? Or, it's like a risk versus reward, right? Oh, I didn't kill her in time, now she got another bubble, or now she got healed and she has much more charge, right? So the tank health can be lower overall, but there's inherent risk and decision making with interacting with these tanks, basically, right? That's kind of what I'm looking for. It's like, now you're making decisions about whether it's a good idea to try and chunk the tank health bar or not, because if you try to do that, there's a possibility that tank gets something out of it, and then they're stronger because you didn't finish the job properly. Does that make sense? That helps with their survivability, and it allows them to be it puts more skill onto the tank role, but also more skill in interacting with the tank role. It makes the whole thing more engaging, but still gives survivability. And I'll give you some more examples as we go through the list about some of those things. Also, you don't see it here, it's at the very bottom, but the DPS passive has been removed. I think that is too much of, or what's it called? I think in this thing, we don't want tanks. I don't think tanks are as survivable with health. Again, that could be a balanced type of deal. But, basically, right now, just assume the DPS passive is gone. Tanks are inherently squishier based on numbers, but in practice, with general survivability changes to their kits, more power in their kits, it should work okay. So, now, going into the tank role passive, it's been removed. Or all of them have. I don't like them very much, and I don't think they need that damage reduction, especially with the changes I've given. Again, lots of armor for tanks, less health overall, but their sustainability comes from armor. So, let's go into the individual changes, and we'll talk about some of the problems that come with a lot of these characters. So, D.Va, I have a couple of changes here. I think she's generally fine and a little underrated. In fact, she's really good right now, but I think she works in 5v5 decently well. I think there just needs to be more incentive to use DM offensively. I think a lot of times D.Va saves DM for herself in Overwatch 2, which doesn't feel as great, and it's just a survivability tool at that point, which I think that's still fine, but being able to DM a teammate and actively peel, or be much more aggressive with your DM and actively eat things before they're coming, or interrupt, a DPS or something, encouraging that playstyle will make D.Va much more engaging. But also, it's less survivable per se. Like, it's basically, don't use DM for survivability. Be much more active with it, right? Mitigate the damage before it's going to hurt you or your teammates. So basically, I've come up with either allow her to shoot during her DM, or maybe while she eats damage in her DM, if she eats enough of it, she gets some extra damage on top of that. Or maybe her micro missiles do more damage, kind of like the Emong change. I think that's a great way to encourage D.Va to be much more in your face. And then, in turn, I think Defense Matrix can be, the resource can deplete faster, and it doesn't need to be as up as often, because it's much more engaging for D.Va and much more focused about when she does it. I also changed her ultimate, basically because D.Va's uptime is severely hit when she self-destructs, because she has to go out into baby form and back away and survive for like 5 seconds while it explodes. And the mech really doesn't do much. Really, when the bomb goes off, yes, it clears space, but by the time it's exploded, you can come back into that space, and D.Va still has to re-mech in that time. So you're effectively not doing that much in terms of creating space for your team, and you're potentially losing a lot more space when it happens. So basically the way I have it now is that D.Va will stay inside the mech right up until it explodes. She is fully actionable the whole time while the countdown is going. We'll say that the mech damage is going to get reduced pretty greatly because she has so much control and damage while the self-destruct is going to happen. But once D.Va pops out of the mech, she will almost instantly be scooped up by another one. So basically she can put this big AoE pressure on the, again, not as much damage by a while, but this big AoE pressure to clear space on the enemy, and then be able to take that space and keep that space right away. I think she could still probably be interrupted by it if you're good enough to hit like an insane shot or a good CC. Like, there would still be counterplay to it, but it would be much more effective overall and allow D.Va to do her job better. And it's one of those, like, it's like Primal, right, where she just, like, it's another survivability tool. She gets, like, another life. I think this would be a much healthier and, like, much more coherent way to use self-destruct. For Doomfist, I think he's generally pretty good. He's high. He provides his utility with damage, and he's got decent survivability through his movement, although his ability to counterplay CC right now is pretty poor, and chaining them together will really hurt Doom. So I came up with the idea of, what if Power Block was CC immune only in the front? and it had a much shorter. It was just much shorter duration. Basically, how this would act is like a parry. So Doom is going in, expecting there to be CC, and if he properly baits it out correctly, he can block it and get a punch, and basically parry the CC. If he messes it up, if he turns his back improperly, you can still catch him out and still get him. He is still weak to CC, but he has a way to counteract it in some form or fashion, and he is then potentially rewarded by getting his punch if he is able to block a CC ability. I think that'd be much more engaging, really cool. Again, you wouldn't have Doom just standing there waiting for block. It's going to be much shorter, much more active, much more engaging of an ability, and hard to use. It's not just like a free, I'm going to block your CC. If Doom is able to parry you, then you kind of have to go, well, he kind of outplayed me. You know, he that guy's cool, right? I think that would make Doom a lot more engaging, and it doesn't make him much better than he actually is. It just helps him a little bit on his struggle area. And again, it's not that powerful, I don't think. Junker Queen. I think Junker Queen is perfectly fine. The only thing I would say is that if she needs, her self-survivability comes from healing herself, and the overhealth that she gets, and I think that's fine if her health pool went down a little bit. Maybe she doesn't even need any armor. Maybe she'd be perfectly fine. If she is really struggling against poke comps, you could totally increase the distance that a knife pulls, or you could increase the speed of the throw, so that you can better dislodge people from further ranges. Other than that, I think JQ is definitely perfectly fine and has counterplay built in to varying degrees against certain types of comps and heroes. So no problems there. Mauga is definitely a tough one. Basically, what I want to do with Mauga is, before I show you all the things, though you probably read some of them, I want Mauga's skill ceiling and risk reward. I want his skill ceiling to go up and his risk reward to be more better. I want there to be some actually interesting dynamics with Mauga, and I think that his survivability tools are just too much. He has armor on top of the DPS passive, on top of damage reduction in his moves, on top of lifesteal, on top of overhealth. He has just so many things to keep himself in the fight that I think some of them need to be removed. So on Overrun, and with the changes I've made overall to tanks, on Overrun and on Cardiac, I think his damage reduction can be removed. And I also think that the allied effect on Cardiac can no longer give them lifesteal. Instead, it will just give them a bit of overhealth that is deployed over the duration of the ability. This is going to reduce the amount of sustain he has. I also had the idea, I didn't put it in here, that his guns should do less damage overall, but increase the headshot, like actual headshot rewards, more often, so that when you hit skillful shots, you are rewarded with more overhealth. So that way, it's much more skillful, and then that also affects his cardiac, and it basically has a lot more to it. I wanted to lean more into getting overhealth rather than damage reduction and lifesteal. He can still lifesteal during cardiac, numbers could be tweaked and stuff like that, but making Mauga more active and also just more interactable from the other team at all times will make him much more fun to fight against, and I also think much more fun. Also, I forgot to change the name on here. It still says Cardiac Overdrive. I changed Cage Fight because I hate it. Connor, this is a fake patch notes. This is fake. I made this. I'm filming a video right now. So basically, I hate Cage. I hate the barrier. I think it's just a weird dynamic of having to run in and out of the cage, or running into the cage to save your Mauga, or then you can pop Cage and then get stuck in it and you have to cancel. There's a lot of weird things to it. I would say if we want to remove the frustrating part of Mauga of getting stuck in there with the demon, what if we just remove the barriers so that you can still help, but you're rooted and you can't use your movement abilities? And then Mauga could move a little more freely and actually use his stomp and use the fun parts of his kit. Then you could basically it's like a Mei ult, but they can fight back. I think that would make it, again, it's not really like a cage fight anymore. I would just change the name or something. This doesn't really have anything to do with tankiness. I just wanted to throw this out there because I just hate cage fight. But overall, if Mauga were able to, his sustain was taken out of his abilities, and then he could do more damage, more playmaking, reward skill a little more, then I think we would not hate Mauga nearly as much. Okay. For Orisa, again, I want to encourage more aggressive play, and take some of her survivability and make it more skill-based. So again, the damage reduction on Fortify will be removed here. And right now, the idea I had was to allow the damage that Ori does during Fortify to give her some overhealth. I don't want her to feel like a Mauga or like a Junker Queen or anything. Like, I don't want there to be too many abilities that are very similar to each other. So if you have any other ideas, I'm not sold on this one. I'd love to hear them. But I also think Fortify, instead of it having a speed reduction, if it's not going to have damage reduction, I think it should probably just have a speed increase so she can close the gap a little more. And it also gives her, like a second way to use it. Instead of it just being like a CC immunity ability, it can be a way for her to close the distance a little more. She can choose how she uses it. And again, you also have like this way to gain some overhealth based on her skill, then it's going to make the ability much more engaging and also, again, give you counterplay to Fortify other than just not shooting Orisa for 4 seconds. I think the rest of her kit is perfectly fine as is. Ramattra, I think his survivability is skewed into his Nemesis form. In fact, most of his power is skewed into his Nemesis form. So what I would do is, I'm going to talk about the Void Barrier first. I think the duration of the shield should be shortened, but he also should have a less of a cooldown so that he can use it more often in different ways, much more versatile. But also it should overall increase his way to get into fights and close the distance. And then once you get there, Nemesis form is much less defensive and much more offensive because now the block is going to be on a resource. So you have to be much more careful about how you block and use your defensive part of the kit. And so in theory, if you properly play around your barrier, getting in and having your resources, then you can be much more aggressive with your Nemesis form. And that's going to reward that playstyle much more often. All right. Next, I have Reinhardt, which I think he's generally pretty good, but the only thing that he really needs is movement and being able to function by himself, right? So Reinhardt, I have just any of these will work, I think. Either reduce the cooldown of charge so that he can use them more often, give him multiple charges, again, so he can use them more often, or just make it resource-based, right? So he can charge a little bit, use some of the resource, and then charge again and go somewhere else. This will allow Rein to contest more spaces of the map more often and be like a big frontline damage presence like he is supposed to be without the need of a Lucio or like a proper support line. He can function by himself in much more varied comps. And then again, Reinhardt also typically benefits a lot from armor, so he can be that damage presence without having to have his shield up and let his allies do it. He can do the damage as well. All right, Roadhog. These changes are supposed to make Hog a little bit more risk-reward intensive. Instead of him just kind of sitting there and waiting and baiting out, like playing very passively, I want him to be more aggressive and be riskier with his plays. So basically what I've done here is we're going to have to talk about some things because there's a lot of weird changes if you're just reading them outright. So I think Vape as a survivability tool is very frustrating, and I think if he gave Hog armor and removed the damage reduction on Breather, it would feel a lot better to fight into. And then with Hog, because he has less survivability overall, I've given him a new passive where he'll do more damage based on the amount of damage he has recently taken. What this does now is that Hog can be more aggressive. And then now the other team has to make a choice about whether they try and burst him down. And if they're unsuccessful, now he's going to be much more lethal. Instead of Hog having a chain hook that pulls right to him, chain hook is only going to pull halfway, so that his up close game doesn't really change very much, but his long range game does. And the only way for his long range hooks, these bigger, less risky hooks, to be effective is for him to have taken damage already, right? And that's going to tie into take a breather, right? So it still heals him. So you're still able to get that health back and then go for those hooks. But the only way for you to get that extra damage is to have taken some damage already. So Hog cannot just turtle and hook you from across the map. He would have some incentive to take space and be risky. It's going great, Leo. I am filming a video right now with some fake tank patch notes trying to fix tank in 5v5. Anyways, the next two, Sigma and Winston, very versatile. Always, they're great. I honestly think they really don't need any changes. In fact, I think Sigma benefited from coming to 5v5 because he's no longer as annoying as he used to be in 6v6 with another tank. Winston is also just very versatile. If you wanted to, give him some more uses for a secondary fire. But other than that, I think these two are fine. Wrecking Ball, another character that suffers from CC, chain CC. So I think being able to outplay or bait it is really something that Ball is going to need. I think giving him true burst movement options should, one, give him more options for movement, which is great, always fun. And two, give him some much needed counterplay to CC. So basically the changes I've made is that when you retract the grappling claw, you will be going much faster. It'll put you into Fireball, right? So you'll zoom up, and then that's going to open lots more movement options and tech and stuff like that. But it can also be activated during Pile Driver, just the retract portion, right? So if you use the grappling claw during Pile Driver, you'll retract to that point. The reason I did this is that it gives you a burst movement option to avoid CC, right? It's risky because you're using two of your cooldowns, and if you mess it up, now you're down two. But if you do it properly, you can keep your uptime up and basically play this mind game with them about like, am I going to grapple claw? Am I just going to pile drive on you regularly, right? I think that's a really interesting dynamic. And also it just opens up more ways that Ball can engage and do stuff like that. And finally, Zarya. I think Zarya really just needs a little bit of more movement options to get her into the fight. Because as it stands, Zarya struggles to gain charge by herself, and she needs all of her resources back and charge to actually get in there and be a menace. So if you gave her some movement speed on her barriers, now she has some extra sauce to play around with, because now she can close the distance much more effectively and get on top of backlines much more effectively. I don't want to just keep saying effectively, but once she gets on top of backlines more efficiently, then they have to make the choice about like, do we want to break the bubble and risk her getting too close to us with too much charge, and then giving her a safer exit with her other bubble, or do we want to let her get close to us and not shoot us, but now she has made lots of space for her team that could be used to surround us and make us lose the fight, right? There's interaction with the tank, but it's not just inherent value, right? There's decision-making from the tanks and decision-making from the other people, right? And that helps Zarya, again, close the distance and not be so weak to poke and even dive in some instances. And yeah, that's it. So again, just to recap, I do want to say that with these changes, it is going to have tank health pools being lower, their tank passive being reduced, tanks generally having much more armor than they have right now. Put the survivability in the health pool rather than in the kit, so that the kit can have much more interesting things, right? Have some of the survivability be indirect. Have it be decisions about whether to shoot the tank or not, right? Introduce more risk reward. Tank is a hard role. That is the appeal of it. There's a lot of decision making that comes down to it. But I think having tanks have the decisions is great. We need to introduce more decisions for the enemy to make instead of just always chaining CC or always shooting the tank when you see them. Having interactions that are dynamic with the tank makes both roles much more engaging and basically it makes skillful play better on both sides. I think that is what we need to focus on for tanks, right? It's not direct stacking survivability, adding all these extra things that make the roles confusing. The kits themselves on an individual level need some help, right? Tanks need to be a little more versatile. They need to have more counterplay. They need to have more interactions. That's what we should be focusing on, not just general survivability, not just pumping numbers. We should be focusing on the kits and how do we make them much more effective and engaging overall. And I think that can be achieved in 5v5. Whether the dev team want to do that or have the resources to do that, that's another thing. But I don't think that 6v6 is the be-all, end-all solution, and I don't think that a couple bad patches proves that 6v6 is the only way. I think there is something to work with here. I hope that this, in theory, again, this is all working theory. It doesn't really matter so much as in terms of like general specifics. This is all to get the brain juices flowing. I hope this proved, or at least showed some lights of hope that there is a direction for 5v5. But thank you guys so much for watching me ramble on about this topic. I know tanks can be a very contentious topic with the Overwatch community in general. So feel free to let me know how you feel, right? Give me a comment, like, subscribe, any of that good YouTube stuff. I do like hearing from you guys. If you have any hot takes or anything about tanks that you want to talk about, join my Discord. It is down in the description below. And as always, if you want to get in on these discussions live, it's going to be Tuesdays, Thursdays, and Saturdays on my Twitch channel, twitch.tv/LaneHemingway. I'd love to talk to you guys about it live. Anyways, thank you guys so much for watching. Have a good day.